Good afternoon, Stephen. Thank you for joining me today on the Naughty Bikes podcast. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm very well. Lunch is still going on a little bit below me, but I'm upstairs at the Sportsman, um,
Oh, fantastic.
overlooking the salt marsh, and it's wet and windy.
Sounds
Yeah,
magical. I need
yeah.
that.
Well,
So,
yeah.
so I want to ask, as you know, my podcast is called The Naughty Bikes. What's your naughty pleasure?
Oh, naughty pleasure. I'm terrible. I can be really good with food. Good in the sense of not eating too much, because I'm prone. I've always struggled with my weight all my life, really. And but by the end of the day, I get this kind of need for something, and the trouble is, I live above a restaurant, and the so I really do nearly always have a snack late at night that's quite sweet, but I'm getting better at it. But that'll be something like maybe a scoop of ice cream.
So nice.
I can do that though with some ground up. At the moment, it's a scoop of vanilla ice cream or milk ice cream with some ground up hazelnuts, honeycomb, and kind of fayette crumbs, which we serve with a
Oh
lot
my god.
of things. So yeah, that's the problem. Could you resist that every
Do you know,
day?
do you
Every
know
day.
what I do? That's amazing because what I do is like, if I love lentils, any form of lentils.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and I sometimes, when we have lentil curry, I make
Mm.
a lentil toasty. And I love
Oh,
it with like grated cheese because I love cheddar cheese,
right.
buttered toast, and hot lentil curry. And that's my snack sometimes. When I'm working late,
Oh,
I
oh,
get
no, that's quite a
peckish.
good.
Yeah,
That's
try
quite. That's
it.
quite a good one. Yeah, I love lentils. I know it's a thing now that's been around for a long time, but one of the girls who works downstairs does a kind of a lentil bolognese for her children,
Oh, I'm
and
gonna try that.
yeah, I think it's someone like Ottolenghi or something like that. But
Okay.
so yeah, I thought that as soon as I heard it, I thought,
Ah,
yeah, that's
it
what a nice way
works.
of doing a nice, rich, sticky kind of winter thing, but that doesn't involve meat, which is
Oh,
win-win, isn't it? I suppose.
I'm gonna try that. I'll have a look because I've got one of his books, but we'll have a look. 'Cause I like that sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
So you create seasonal dishes using local ingredients from Kent.
yeah.
What's your favourite season, and how do you incorporate this into your menus?
Well, I thought about what my favourite season was a bit lately. Having a bit more
Mm,
time with lockdown. The last two
yeah.
years. When we've been kind of out of action. And I always used to say, I always used to say that I loved spring, but
Mm,
spring is actually hell in England
okay.
because you've got the lovely weather. You crave the kind of, you crave the fruit and vegetables that are coming in summer, but they
Yeah.
don't come. They take ages and ages. And actually, most of the spring you spend eating all the leftover root vegetables from winter.
Mm,
I'm quite strict with seasons. If you were to put put a menu in front of me of my restaurant, I could probably get to within a couple of weeks of
okay.
when it is. So, for example, um, anyway, that comes to my answer, which is that actually I have to own up, it's summer because
Okay.
everything is in season, it's in great condition. And so, for example, in the summer, I can tell, like we'll have something like a green gauge souffle. So we do fruit souffles, which are based, they're based on whatever the seasonal fruit is. So it tends to be rhubarb in February, March, and then we'll kind of follow the seasons through with as many different. And anyway, green gauge souffle, which comes into season last week of July and
Mhm.
is in season until about the last week of August. Then plum takes over. Then we had a brief period with apples, which we'll go back to because you can
Mm.
store apples. But at the moment, we're doing quince souffle,
Oh, I love
um,
Prince.
cream cheese ice cream. So, yeah, so we that's always a very good guide. But also, just things like At the moment, squashes aren't quite ready. You know, we're curing ours in our beer cellar at the moment. So we've grown them, we've picked lots of them, and we've got two different types. We've got butternut squash and we've got crown prince pumpkins. And they, you know, they'll come on in the next week or so. So, you know, they're very much an October, late October thing. Yeah, so we're quite strict. You know, the seasons aren't as simple as four. You know, there are patterns within the season. Fruits, for example, through summer, and vegetables. You know, sweet corn is an August thing. You know, August, September. Whereas asparagus obviously is May. You know, April, end of April, May. Peas are very much kind of like May, June, July. You know, high summer. So you know, I that's how I work. You know, very kind of like week to week. You know,
that's incredible.
Yeah. Well, because we got a garden, you know, because we grow our own stuff. I mean, we do get stuff from elsewhere, but in the summer this year, we were 80 to 100% of our own vegetables. So we're forced to be seasonal, and because you know, we have to follow them because that's what's available. So it's a really nice way of cooking. I love that way of cooking. I don't think I want to do this. What I do is my gardener says, we've got this. You turn that into a menu. And I, you know, that's
better. Definitely. Because that's led me to my next question, actually, because what you've just said, there has been a rise of the curious consumer, or the curious people. So they're looking for transparency, they're looking for provenance. And a growing number of them now are supporting sustainable farming, local producers, and they don't mind paying more money knowing that they're going to get value, you know, something that has a shorter food chain. And so therefore they've been making more questions, and they're questioning the origins of the ingredients. And you've just answered my question. How do you showcase this in your meals? Because you're forced to
yes, I mean, it's interesting. Yes, it's very interesting because some people operate on different levels. What I've been doing now for 20 years is allowing, 23 years I've been at the sports, and we've always cooked ultra seasonally. And what we do is we're in the southeast, so everything comes into season first here because it's the warmest place, the lightest place in the country. It's, you know, everything seems to come into season. Whereas, say I was up north, it's interesting when I say I'm following someone on Instagram and I see they're using elderflowers and it's July. My elderflowers are long gone, you know, and I get 3 weeks with elderflowers. And during that time, we have an elderflower posset with a elderflower fritter. You know, we serve that as a pudding next to it. So a little posset, very flavoured with elderflower. It's all picked from the trees around here, but that will only last 3 weeks. And that's what I mean about, you know, but we tend to get things in season early, but they go out of season earlier. We get the same amount of time that they're in season, you know, and that's how you can tell if you know, if, as you're saying, people are interested in provenance. You literally just look around you because you can see what's in season here.
That's amazing.
You can see what's in the bushes and the hedgerows if that's what you want. You know, like we just finished local blackberries, which we served with a mushroom pate, and you know they were gorgeous this year. They lasted for nearly 2 months, but they're August, September sometimes. You know, you might creep into September. So yeah, if you're looking for seasonal, you know, I can be a bit cynical that there are a lot of people who use the idea of local and seasonal food still as a marketing tool, and I'm not so sure that they're wedded to the idea to the extent that I am. Because for me, it's like breathing. It's just so natural that you use what's around you that's in season, and that's it, you know. Because that's what I do, you know, and always have done.
No, definitely. I think I think when you just said that, it's like I had a podcast with Tim Adams last week, and it's what he was saying as well. It's become, you know, like that. Your produce is your garden. You look out, and you're like, okay, this is it. It's your surroundings.
Yes.
But it's become a buzzword as well, and it's like, so when you say sustainability, it's become such a hot topic. But
yeah, it has, hasn't it?
Yeah,
sustainability is a real thing, and you know, good on the face of it. But I do think you have to drill down with these things and check that there aren't, as there always are in life, some charlatans using them for their advantage, normally marketing way.
Definitely.
So you get a lot of that. You know, you get it with, for example, restaurants which say, "Oh yeah, we grow all our own stuff," and you look at, you know, and they've got an acre, and it's like, hang on, you can't grow. I mean, I do 100 covers a day, 50 at lunch, 50 in the evening. So, you know, that's a lot, you know, so we can't grow everything. But this year we got to about 80% during the summer months. But, you know, there are a lot of practical things which make it very difficult to make everything you need for a restaurant.
Definitely.
So be careful, you know. I always treat it with a bit of caution. Sustainability, I mean, I'll tell you what, in 2001, when I started really around the turn of the millennium, when I started doing this, I was so wedded to the idea of cooking seasonally and locally and everything, that I started coming up with a tasting menu that was literally just the food from a few miles around me. And I did that for a very strong reason, which I'll tell you later if you want. But sustainability wasn't necessarily number one on my agenda. I wasn't doing it because it was sustainable. It happened to be sustainable because I wasn't using any kind of anything that had been tracked. Now, I know food miles, a lot of people say food miles don't matter. You can buy lamb from New Zealand that's got less carbon footprint than some lamb from a farm down the road. It depends. I'm not sure I believe that. But sustainability wasn't the reason I started doing what I'm doing. It was a romantic idea of the cuisine de terroir from France. In other words, cooking that reflects the land around. Now, you can't just do cuisine de terroir in a city because the land around you doesn't provide you with. You can have another idea, which is just as good, you know, but you have to, you know, if you're going to cook using your landscape, you really have to be creative, and because you're putting a big limitation on yourself. And a lot of people don't want that. You know, I remember when we first started, people said, "You just got cabbage on." You know, it's like, yeah, that's what's growing. There's cabbage, there's maybe carrots, there's swede. You know, that's seasonal cooking. We're not going to import some fine beans from Kenya just because, you know, we're a restaurant. And that was a complete change of attitude, because people back then probably thought, well, you know, get them flown in from Kenya, what's the problem? Or, you know, so that's from Mexico, does it matter? That was the attitude back then. You know, the idea that you only use the vegetables that were growing at the moment down the road at the farm we used for vegetables was radical. And we had people saying, well, if it's still just cabbage and broccoli, I'm not coming. You know, so you know, sorry, but that's what we're doing. So it's all moved on a lot, you know. But my original motive was to, as I say, it was the romantic idea of food just from around where I am, which is a very food place. I'll explain that if you want later. But sustainability only starts really becoming a bit of a buzzword around about 2009 or 10 in food. Seriously. And then you get these kind of restaurants, you know, I don't know, I saw something the other day, they project the menu on the wall so they don't use paper, and I'm like, but you use a projector that uses bulbs and electricity and all that. Why don't you just use a chalkboard?
But it's curious because
that doesn't use any energy apart from the person who writes it.
Exactly. But it was really curious because I think during lockdown and during COVID, a lot of augmented reality kind of emerged from the restaurants. So having, what you just, a projector on the screen, or having menus that were shown on your table, but you can just flick through it, as opposed, it's become a fashionable.
It's trying to impress, isn't it? Yeah. It's trying to be like, oh, that's new. In other words, they're just trying to make a mark. And I get it. Everybody wants to make a mark, but I don't see it as, it ain't going to save the world. When you've got, kind of 1 billion people in India and 1 billion people in Brazil and 1 billion people in China and 500 million in Nigeria and everything, all needing food and using and giving off carbon, and us, everyone. It's I don't think these things are really going to solve any kind of a problem. These things, I think, unfortunately, have to be done on a global scale by cooperation between countries on a massive scale. That's how climate problems are going, if they're going to get solved, that's how they're going to get solved. I'm afraid. I love, I don't criticize anyone for wanting to try and make things better, but mine began not with that feeling. Mine began with the feeling of, what a lovely idea of all the food just coming from what's around you. That was the point I was making.
I think that's right. I think that's right, because when I lived in March, so like in Cambridgeshire, so I worked in potatoes because it's abundance in root vegetables and stuff. But I remember when I used to drive past the farms, they'd be like, oh, local produce. It'd be like carrots or swede or beetroot. And I'm not really a fan of beetroot, but because it was in season, I thought, I've got to try it. So I thought, how can I incorporate this in my food? And I made a mung curry, like a mung lentil sort of curry.
Yeah.
And I roasted the what's it called? The beetroot, and then I shredded it with coconut, and then I sprinkled it on top. So I was like, okay, that I can handle because it's
like you would with a dal normally. You grate coconut.
Yeah, and I thought, why not? So I thought, let me try something different. Trying my love for beetroot, and I like it in small doses because it's such a strong vegetable that it was nice that it complemented the spice.
No, it's a weird vegetable. There's no way around it. It's a Marmite vegetable in the sense that people love it or hate it.
Yeah,
weird because it's sweet and earthy, and earthy isn't. I mean, all right, lentils are earthy, aren't they? And I guess mung beans are earthy.
Yeah.
And, there's an earthy taste there. But earthy with sweet within the same vegetable.
You're right. It's Marmite.
They make sugar out of them. I mean, that was how they, white beetroot was originally sugar beet. So that's how they'd make sugar. So they'd extract it from the beetroot, reduce the juice right down till it's crystallized, and then break it up into sugar. So that's, it's that sweet that they make sugar out of it. But yeah, I get it. It's a weird vegetable, and I didn't like it. I'd eat it, but I would eat it like you. Yeah. I'd have a bit, and I wouldn't say, like, when they come up at the beginning of a meal and say, is there any dislikes or allergy? I wouldn't say, oh, I don't like beetroot. But I must admit, inside me, a little bit of me died when it arrived on a plate. And I think about that when I put it on the menu, because it is controversial. It's weird. I went to a restaurant in Paris with a chef called Alain Passard, who is the greatest vegetable cook in the world. He has 3 farms, which he literally grows everything, has it brought into his Paris restaurant, and does a menu of just the stuff from his farm. He's a bit of a hero. And he's got this 3 Michelin star restaurant, which is quite controversial in Paris. He was known for giving up cooking meat when he was one of the best meat cooks in France. Oh, wow. And you have to be good if you're good at meat in France. He was anyway. And I went there, and what he does with beetroot would convert anyone. He is amazing. He manages to keep he's talking on such a high level about vegetables, about maintaining most of his vegetables never see a fridge because they're picked, and then they, he uses them in a day or two. And so, but his food, the food tastes earthy. It tastes of the garden, and I can't describe it any better than that. But if you go, it's just fantastic. And he talks about the sap. So I now, when I'm cooking vegetables that I've just picked, give you a good example. If I go out into my garden and I get a French bean, a fine bean, say about, then I'm going to serve it with, say, maybe lamb or chicken or whatever. So I quite often do this to illustrate to people. Snap one in half and squeeze the bit where you snapped it, and all this juice comes out. That's the sap in the vegetable. Now try doing that with one that was imported from Kenya, and it would be dry. Not because there's anything wrong with Kenyan beans, but the fact that it was picked a month ago and stored. Yeah. So his food has this sappy taste of fresh vegetables. And I didn't realize how much I love that taste until I went to his restaurant. And he's really, all that is kind of really gave me an extra jet boost in what I do. It really made me think, this is a great path to go on, because I get to cook with vegetables that were picked that morning. And if you have beetroot that's just been picked, there's something there's something extra, which means that the sweet earthiness is more tolerable. But when it's stored, it changes slightly. And that's the kind of what I don't like, is slightly old beetroot.
It reminds me of like stored potatoes when they go. There's a smell that comes with it afterwards. It reminds me of that. But it's curious you say that, because I've never thought about it like that in terms of the sap. Because here as well, like eating the seasons is a massive thing. It's your dishes are prepared because of what's growing, and that's what I love about it, because I don't like the fact that when avocados are not in season, and for some reason I have no idea why they import it, because we live on, like, avocados grow 40 minutes down the road. So when they're imported, the price is phenomenal. It's like so expensive. And it lacks flavor. It lacks sweetness, the creaminess and the sweetness, because it just the skin breaks away and the avocado snaps. It's really weird. I don't understand it, and I don't know how to do it. But I wish they encouraged more of that with certain types of produce,
Yeah. I mean, I found this with California in general, for example. They often they often have like 4 harvests a year because of the climate. And I think there is a time. I don't know about this. I know this about grapes for wine, that the gap between the flowering in, say, I can't think, say the flowering's in June, and the picking of the grape has to be at least 100 days for certain phenolic compounds to develop in the grape. So if you have a really hot summer and that 100 days isn't kept, I mean, ideally 120 days, and then there will be complexity in that grape, as well as sweetness and all the other things you need for making good wine. If that 100 days isn't met, those phenolic compounds don't develop, and so you get wine, when it's grown for a short amount of time, is less complex. So you pick the grapes, they'll be nice and sweet, but you come to drink it and it's like alcoholic Ribena. There's no grunt, there's no earth, there's no phenolic content, because it didn't have long enough growing, because these things have a certain time they need. I'm wondering whether that happens with vegetables that are grown too quick.
Definitely. There's something missed.
Different. It does have a big difference. I mean, tomatoes, grow tomatoes in a polytunnel versus outdoors, and they'll have a thicker skin. Coating. Skin.
Definitely.
So there's all these questions. So, I think that that's one of the things that when you grow, you begin to appreciate things like that, about the natural way of things. There are some things you can't fake. I mean, with tomatoes, they do it brilliantly, because they now change the varieties, they cross them, till you get super sweet tomatoes, and people are happy with that. But I want sweet with mixed with minerality in my tomato. So, you know, when I bite them, I like that burst of sweetness, but I want there to be some kind of earthy, minerally tang underneath that, you know?
Yeah, because you get that a lot with vine ripened, like naturally vine ripened tomatoes.
Yes, yeah.
The smell already attracts you, and then you try it. It's a sweetness followed by a subtle acidity, but it's earthy, and that's the experience that I enjoy with my tomatoes.
And if it's not there, then you know, you end up compounding it when you have a meal of vegetable particularly vegetables that aren't that great, you know, and that's you don't end up with that satisfied feeling that you do. You see, I've got this vision of a perfect meal, and it's very simple. It's like a steamed piece of sea bass with some peas and broad beans and that have just been picked in a very light kind of sauce, you know, that's so perfect that you get the fish, and you know the fish is cooked because it's steamed. You can really taste the pure flavor of the fish, super fresh, and you bite into it and you have it with the vegetable and that little bit of sauce, and you get mouthfuls of food that you can't get it anywhere else unless you've got a garden. You see, I know a lot of people who eat here have their own garden, so they actually have great produce. So I've got to top that. So, you know, I've got a technique is what I can top that with, you know. So somebody who can go out into their garden and pick some runner beans, you know, we do that. My soon-to-be wife grows lots of vegetables, and we had them in the summer. So you get a bit spoilt like that, but just a perfect meal for me would have all that sap and the earthiness of the garden all there, and then I might, you know, and then not overcooking them. So, for example, you know, quite often with vegetables, I have to say to the guy cooking the vegetables, remember, you're just warming them up. You're not cooking them, because you could eat these raw.
Yeah.
You know, you're literally just using warmth to tease a flavor out of something, and you don't have to. Otherwise, you know, most people at home will overcook things. People are quite scared of food.
It's true, because what I do is really because I love when peas come in season, and here they're super short.
Yeah.
So I'm just used to like podding them and stuff. But I love eating fresh peas raw because they're so sweet and they're delicious. But because I was eating them, my little one, he would have been about 16 months or whatever it was. He's now 21, but months. Okay. But was copying me 21. It's called magic.
I was going to say, you must eat a lot of vegetables. Yeah.
He was imitating me, copying me, and eating the peas as well. And I was like, it's brilliant, because he loves eating everything. And it was just a good thing for me to share with him. But curiously, you mentioned a perfect meal. The other month, we went to Bilbao to see family. And we went to, because a lot of Spanish restaurants cook with everything from their province.
Yes.
So very strong about that. And it sounds really strange, but I had a lettuce pie. Right. So it's really bizarre. So it was steamed cod, and from steamed cod. It was really super thin, and it was covered in 2 like lettuce leaves.
Right.
And it was coated. I think it would have been coated in cornstarch, because there was like a thin layer of pastry, which wasn't pastry, it was cornstarch. So I was like, okay. Yes. And it was cooked in a cider wine sauce.
Yeah,
super thin.
Wow.
But I was like, I'm curious, because I've never had this before. I would never order it, but it was magnificent. It melted because it was super thin, and the sauce was so light and simple. Everything complemented each other because of the subtle flavors that we used, and also because the apple was from the land, from their garden.
Yeah,
because it's a cider place, and then the lettuce was local, and then there's cod. It was remarkable, and it was a perfect meal because it was subtle without any of the flavors overpowering each other. It was unusual. Like, I'm still thinking about it now, thinking, oh my god, how did they?
Oh, well, there you go. That's a great bit of cooking.
So then let me bring you back. So we're talking about food and provenance and
Yes.
the land.
Yes.
What do you think is the definition of British food?
Well, that's an interesting one in itself, because, of course, Britain's quite regional, you know. I mean, in France, I always say this to people, in France, it's such a big country, from north to south, that you have, for example, Normandy cooking, which is apples, it's butter-based, it's farmyard animals like, cows and lambs, and fish from the north coast, which is turbot, sole, those kind of things. Then you have down in the south, you have Provençal cooking, where the climate's a Mediterranean climate. It's a different climate. So France has these huge different climates, and therefore completely different, like if you're an artist, completely different colors to paint with. So in the south of France, it's goats, lamb, it's olive oil, it's fruit, citrus fruits, all that kind of stuff. So if you think of it like that, France is very regional. So you can't say what's French cooking. You have to say which part of France. Now in England, because we have a less developed sense of food, because we haven't had a food culture for as long as France has. If you ask what is British cooking, it's also regional, but not necessarily. We don't have an area that's so hot that it's got a different climate. We have a maritime climate that's based on, so it's quite damp. It's very moderate temperatures usually, and that's the climate of England. And the climate dictates what you can grow, and what you grow dictates what you can eat, until the days when you can import it. So now British food is related to where is related to empire, or what it was. I mean, you got the same thing in Spain, haven't you? I suppose the influence of South America, but so there's that. But there's all it's there are a few things. So oats come from the north, wheat is grown in the south. So that starts giving you different, so up north you'll get oat cakes and soda breads and all that kind of stuff. I love it. And in fact, the north also has fantastic seafood. Think of Scottish, think of scallops, mussels, all those things from Scotland, the cold water lochs and growing shellfish. So it's very regional in that sense. Also, the fish is different. So up north, they'll go out and get cod and haddock and all those kind of fish. Down here, we've got more things like turbot, soles, or maybe less, they've got better langoustine, So in other words, Britain's regional in a different way to France, because it's not regional based on different climates. It's regional based really on history and a bit to do with the climate, the weather more than the climate. So what British food for me, but it is, if you say British food, what does it emotionally bring up? It's roast dinners and steamed puddings and that kind of thing. It's traditionally what in Britain's strength was the quality of its ingredients, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that things take a little bit of time to grow, but they do grow. It should be very maritime, but weirdly it isn't. There's not as much tradition of the sea in English cooking and British cooking. There should be. The Scots don't eat their produce.
But it's curious because we're an island and we have an amazing array of fish and shellfish. And it's a shame that a lot of people don't embrace that a bit more than they should.
Well, it's only recently become embraced. I mean, if you would talk to anyone in the industry, if you go to the harbour side anywhere around England or Scotland, even more in Scotland, you'll see agents mainly from Spain, Germany, and France who come over and buy English seafood. and they really do. I mean, I was at a harbourside in Scotland when I was on holiday because the boats were coming in. I saw it, so I got some langoustine tails, which I bought directly off the fisherman, and they were like, "Oh, no one around here eats this."
I love it.
I know.
It's so juicy.
Yeah, and they're like, they don't eat langoustine, and they're on the harbour side. There was Spanish, particularly Spanish. The Spanish love, they love seafood so much.
Yeah.
You go somewhere like Bilbao, and there's that lovely fish market, or there was when I was there, and they'll buy everything up, and they'll pay the high price
because everyone eats it.
Yeah, because everyone eats it, and they realise the value of it.
Definitely.
So the Spanish are like the Japanese of Europe, in terms of, they're mad for their seafood,
It's true. And I think because living in Granada, because of the hot climate, and we do have the coast, we have the coast and the mountains, a lot of people have seafood because it's quick to cook. And in the summer, they fry it a lot because it's because of the heat. We have 40-degree heat. And so you can't do that. But when you go to the north, they're always served with a light sauce, and it's just spectacular. So the contrast in food is very different. Like you said, an artist with different colours, and it's the same thing.
Yeah, but they do understand seafood really well in some other countries. I think we're still learning in Britain about that, because if you serve people a perfectly cooked piece of cod, they'll often say here, they'll be like, "Oh, it's a bit under," No, it is.
I like the slight opaqueness you get.
Exactly. Well, it has to be. That's what I spend, with fish cooking. That's what you spend all your time doing, is that perfect moment. Cod, you have to do that. It's not. It's more forgiving on other fish, but
but you can't overcook, because if not, it gets very chewy. And it's
exactly. And there is a moment when you cut into your cod, and it should have that, exactly what you say, that kind of opaque thing, and the flakes just come apart. If they don't come apart, I accept it's undercooked. In which case, unless the chef wanted that for some reason.
Definitely.
But we eat our medium rare and rare. Why wouldn't you eat seafood medium? I mean, I like scallops medium rare, and people go, "What? Medium rare scallops?" It's like, well, I like them charred on the outside and a little bit raw in the middle.
I love it. That's actually how I have it in the North Coast. It's remarkable.
And I mean, so I don't see why. I hate those kind of TV programs like MasterChef, where they're like, somebody serves a scallop that's undercooked, and they're like, "You can't serve someone that, it will kill." It's like, have you heard of sushi? People eat raw fish, you idiot. And it drives me mad, because it encourages people who don't know what they're talking about to, instead of saying, "Oh yeah, that's great," a slightly medium rare, with certain fish. I'm not saying with everything, but just try it. Be open-minded, and that's what I like about the Spanish. They are open-minded about, in Europe generally.
I think so. And
they might be stuck in their ways. That's one thing we're not. We're good in England.
We're good at trying. You're good at trying.
Exactly. So, at the moment, everyone loves Mexican, Korean. We've always loved Indian and Chinese food.
That's lovely to my next question. It's a bit of a paragraph, but when you define British food, we've had lots of influences from other people and culture. So, the Celts, Romans, Vikings, and then the immigration in the 1800s brought the French, Russian, Italians. And then after World War II, we had settlers from, China, Middle East, parts of Africa, Mediterranean. And over time, they've brought their own food traditions. And then that's what's kind of made up a bit of the British nation sort of thing. Like you just said, people like curries and noodles and bagels, for example. But over the course of time, traders are now bringing in ingredients from overseas. And for centuries, spices, citrus fruits, etc. But traditionally, when I was doing some research back in university, I remember the UK was a beer drinking and butter eating nation, and dairy, pork, breads, because you're saying oats and wheat, and again regional. And then you get the money saving way as well, like using leftovers such as shepherd's pies, which we're famous
Yes.
for,
Yes.
pickled onions, I love. How would you describe British in that aspect? Because you said we're so open to trying new things, which is amazing because it's true in Spain. Where I live, there's only one curry restaurant.
Yes.
And
Italy. Go to Italy. You're gagging for a curry after you come back from Italy, aren't you? I mean, you really are. It's like, oh my God, I can't wait for Chinese or a curry. You know?
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's been an interesting way of defining Britishness in the sense of the openness to try different food from different cultures. You know, some people can say, "Oh, it's a bad thing, what's a good thing?" But what history?
I think the problem. I think the problem
explore
at the root is the attachment of it to empire and imperialism, which is now we're beginning, as we move away from that period and we can look back, you could see the bad side of imperialism a lot more. We thought we were a benevolent country, we thought we were benevolent in Africa or India, but it's now looking like, no, it wasn't. It was really exploitative, and it's a slight embarrassment in the modern world. And I think that is what creates a little bit of a problem with the fact, but the fact remains that it's changed our way of eating.
Definitely, and I think it's made us more open. Because when we go to different countries, we will try different types of food as opposed to, being quite closed,
I mean, like eating pasta every meal, which I found in Italy, once you've got back from some places, you literally, it's the Italian local food, and that's it. There is no kind of variation, which is great in one way because they preserved and kept their tradition. Whereas maybe we turned our back on our tradition. I don't know. So there are people fighting to bring that back, I think.
And I think, and I think I've seen that because some of your recipes, I love the influence of the Frenchness as well. Like, the techniques. And I think it's such a magical way of pairing something traditional and unique to the UK sort of terrain and offering that to people, And I think I have to say that the UK is great about, when we think of cultural diversity, I think it's good in a way that it's defined our traditional style of dishes now, because it's a mix. It's like it's a mix of different cuisines that have become so traditional to the UK, which makes it interesting for the senses,
Yeah, it does. I mean, if you look at English chefs have no problem. At the moment, there's a real big, there are trends and moves in it. And now I find young chefs think nothing of using Japanese or Chinese or Mexican, all these different influences, and they'll drop them in quite easily and naturally. Whereas even a great cooking country like France, that's only just started happening in the last 5 to 10 years, whereas in England we've been doing it 20 or 30 years or whatever. In other words, except curry is, everyone I know loves curry and probably has it once a week. Chinese meal, and now more, Korean, as I said, Mexican, and now people are getting into Vietnamese and Cambodian and all that kind of stuff. And you can get that in Paris. I mean, my first Vietnamese meal was in Paris in the 80s because of the colonial context of France and Vietnam. But it was within a Vietnamese quarter. So it was a bit of a kind of ghetto, it was kind of food, everyone there came from Vietnam, or a lot of that area. Whereas I'm talking about when it's more developed and people in England just drop it into meals quite easily, somebody I know made a shepherd's pie, but with chili con carne base, which I thought was hilarious,
Oh my God.
Or making why not make a chili with mashed corn on top? You could just mix it all up, and that is a good thing. I mean, I'd like to think that England was a welcoming, that was what it used to be. you know, a kind of a quite a welcoming culture and not too precious about its own thing. And I always liked that about England.
Me too.
But of course, there's a bit of a backlash now with the rise of the new right wing. You know, you've got a backlash in particularly Anglo-Saxon countries like America and England and Britain and Australia and places like that, which are reacting slightly because they fear their culture's under threat. Well, I'm not like that. I just think, bring it on, you know, let's have, I love the melting pot. That's why I love cities. That's why I love, you know, kind of being able to get food from anywhere and all over the place with loads of different influences. And yet I end up cooking seasonal stuff that's just around me. So I don't see any political connection.
Yeah, I don't. I embrace the fact that it's become so multicultural that we are able to be so welcoming and understanding.
I hope so.
You know,
I hope.
That's what I remember. That's what I remember.
Yeah.
So, no, and I hope it does stay like that.
Yeah, me too. I think most people are like that, you know, but there's just been a meanness that's crept back in with the rise of the right, you know, that really started to be seen with Brexit, you know, and a lot of it's about fear. A lot of it's about people are scared of losing their culture when, you know, which you don't, you know, your culture is enhanced by being up against others, you know, because, you know, you can take things on. I love that. And I hope that we get back to that kind of openness and kindness and all that kind of stuff, you know.
I'm hoping so. It can only get better.
Yeah.
It can't,
and
it can only get better.
Yes, that's right. And you got to remember that we, i.e. people like us who obviously do like the cultural mashup, you know, we are still, I guess, maybe 60% of the country or 70% of the country. I still think we're in the majority. You look at the kind of spirit there was at the 2012 Olympics.
Yeah, it was fast. It was incredible.
And that was a real celebration of what London's become because, you know, it was the Olympic city, London. And I was just really proud of, I just thought, wow, this is great. You know, it just felt welcoming, but proud of its traditions, but also willing to accept traditions from coming from elsewhere. And that was us at our best in a way. But that's got a bit lost in the last 10 years, I think.
It's scary that it's been 10 years.
I know.
It's
I can remember. I can remember when it was coming
2022, and I'm like, oh my god, 12 years.
And I was looking forward to it. It was like 2009, thinking, oh, well, you know, really looking forward to it. And it was a great thing. And I think I like to think of Britain as that.
I saw, so I was looking at your cookbook. I've actually ordered it because I like some of the recipes, especially because I love game. So I was like, and we get a lot of it over here. So I thought this is a really good opportunity to use it as well.
Yes.
But I saw that you use bread sauce. And in one of your recipes, I think it was with the pheasant.
Yes,
I think it was pheasant.
Yeah, bread sauce.
What's your secret? Because when I saw the photograph, I was like, what's your secret to creating the most creamy, but it was thick, but it wasn't lumpy. It was like, I've not had some great bread sauce, and I love that sort of stuff. But I've had some horrid ones.
Yes.
Have you created something creamy yet thick and yet luscious?
I hate to say it. Do you know what the answer is?
Go on, butter. Yeah,
you're right. It's butter. It's butter. We basically the reason we had bread sauce on the menu. I was in a 3 Michelin-star restaurant in France. I'm not always in them, but I was. And they came up, and it was Michel Bras, who cooks very kind of like terroir kind of cooking. Anyway, they brought over this sauce to serve the waiter with one of the dishes. And he said, and this sauce is made from bread. It's bread, you know. And they were like, isn't that unusual? And I was suddenly thinking, no, for us, no, in England, we use leftover bread in bread sauce, you know. Anyway, so it was lovely and fine, but it wasn't like a really good English bread sauce, where I think you need to get milk and you need to extract, you need onion, chop up a bit of onion and put it in, and then put your spices in, like cloves, like, you know, I mentioned them in the book, cloves and whatever other ones you're using. I mean, I try often with spices. I often like using just one because I love that recognition of what's that? Ah, it's clove. But anyway, that you then cook. and let the breadcrumbs absorb into the milk, which has been flavored. We leave the milk to absorb those flavors. Oh, bay leaf is another one. We leave them to absorb those flavors for a day, 2 days, and then we cook the breadcrumbs in it, and they swell up. And then when they've swollen up and it's all cooked and it's ready, I'm afraid you've just got to go mad with the butter.
I love butter and cream, butter. Yeah,
well, exactly, and it's very important. Now that came from an idea of another French 3-star chef. There's a theme appearing here of Joel Robuchon and his mashed potato. Now, if you've ever had Joel Robuchon, is famous for mashed potato. He's dead now, but he made mash with a kind of new potato, like not, two different types of potato, usually red or white. Red is white is floury, and that's how they break down. He made amazing mashed potato, and then he would add almost half butter, almost half the weight of the mashed potato. Yeah, exactly. It's something that you don't eat, I would say once a year, not even once a month. It's so rich, but it is. I've never known anyone not taste this butter, this mash, and go, oh my God. Anyway, so I was in the kitchen. I was telling everyone this story, and we made some breadsauce, and I just beat in all this butter. And the trick with butter is, if you watch good chefs, Italians making risotto, this guy making mashed potato, they always beat the butter in, and there's a good reason for that. The butter mustn't separate, it mustn't melt. Butter is an emulsion, but it's an emulsion in solid form until then. When you put it in something hot, you keep stirring, and that way when you eat it, you get this creamy thing in your mouth, which if you let it split, you don't get. So
I'm going to try this.
Yeah. So, for example, you make a risotto.
Try this.
Yeah. So, for example, you make a risotto, and you get to the point. I think they even call it this mantecare or something. There's an Italian word for it. Finishing a risotto. So you make a risotto by kind of frying the onion, putting the rice in, then maybe some vermouth, and then hot stock, and you stir it and stir it. And then when there's barely any chalkiness left in the middle of a grain of rice, you stop, and then you let the last bit of the cooking happen in the residual heat. So in other words, you put a lid on it and leave it for 5 minutes, and then the rice will be perfect. It will still be firm, but not raw. Anyway, that is then the moment when you mantecare, which is you chop up the butter cold, put it in, and then you beat it. And by beating it, you keep the butter goes back to kind of almost like cream, rather than if you just leave it. So I've seen some chefs, they'll chuck the butter in, then go and do something else, come back, and there'll be butter oil separated. And wrong.
Does it work?
Doesn't work.
Oh, I will try that.
Yeah. So it's emulsion. It's keeping the emulsion,
Oh, I'm excited. Yeah. So I love your process of cooking and the vegetables that benefit from being picked just before you use it.
Yeah.
What was your thought behind that?
What's the thought behind it? I suppose, mainly the sap thing I talked about earlier. So preserving that, because that is what makes vegetables better. You see, when they first pick, as you know, vegetables are sweet, and then slowly that sugar turns to starch. And as it turns to starch, you get this kind of starchy bitterness coming in, which isn't as nice to eat. They're still fine, and you can do all sorts of things to preserve them. But just like you said, I used to live, when I was a kid, next over the road and past a few houses, there was a huge pea field, and they grew peas. So I spent, when I was 8, 10, 12, just literally just walking past a pea field and just eating them raw like sweets. And I wouldn't even think of cooking small peas. I'd serve them virtually raw. And as I said to chefs, you really are just warming these things through and preserve that sappiness. And that's why, because they have got, and it's the same with beans and all those kind of pea, bean, broad bean, all those kind of vegetables. It's that sap, and I want that in my meal. I don't want to lose that.
Yeah, so we're talking about peas, but you reminded me of when it's pea season here. I love spinach and pea. As a child, I hated it because when we make curry, they always put a lot of fenugreek seeds in.
Yes.
But I prefer not the whole fenugreek. I like it when it's been like shredded, like crushed.
Yes, yeah.
And I prefer that one. But they used to cook it in the oil, but it'd go dark brown, so it was so bitter.
Yes,
As a child, I hated anything with fenugreek seeds. And unfortunately, spinach and pea curry was one of them.
Right.
But as I grew up and I was like studied food and learn, you read books and you learn techniques, etc.
Yeah.
I love fenugreek and I love pea and spinach curry, but I like that when I use fresh peas, the sweetness, and I still keep it slightly hard because I like the texture with the wilted spinach with the peas, because there's a contrast of spice and sweetness. And then your food doesn't taste like baby puree because you've still got texture in it. And that's something
the Indians have a tendency to cook their vegetables for a long time, don't they?
Yeah, and that's something I don't like. So so many dishes I disliked as a kid.
Yeah.
I cook it differently. So my aubergine is just cooked, or my peas are still a bit, they still got a bite to it. Because I like the sweetness.
Almost used like you'd use a herb at the end.
Yeah.
You know, like you chuck coriander into a, like I love coriander, lime, all the things you chuck in at the end. But yeah, I know what you mean. I think that sounds gorgeous. I mean,
do try it, because I do sweat my onions and I caramelize them. And then I just chuck in my spinach. But I only make it when the spinach is in season. So
what cooking fat do you use with that?
I use olive oil because, and I use extra veg. I know people say don't cook with extra veg in. I love it. But
me too.
My secret thing is when it's cooked, I do put in a knob of butter and stir it, because there's something that happens in the curry. And I really like it. It's just like, I don't like beat it, but it somehow just melts, and it's like, it's what you said about the coating. It's like this subtle creaminess, and that's what I love.
It is. It's the way you do it. You can't beat. I mean, I'm afraid if I had to say what's the best way of cooking vegetables, I'll often say, well, you know, you cook them and then at the last moment you put that knob of butter in and you just coat it. Everything. I mean, leeks. Yeah, at the moment we got nice leeks, which is unusual. But at this time of year now, leeks come in all year. They used to be very much February through to April, May, and then they go all woody in the middle. But the seasons they've worked that out. So yeah, leeks, spinach. Oh yeah, I get it. A bit of butter.
You need it. You gotta have it. You know, why be shy? We can enjoy something so.
But that's what's interesting, because obviously they use ghee in Indian cooking, which is clarified, and so you've lost the kind of milk solids that you get. So those have been separated off, and I think that's a bit of a shame in a way, because I understand why they do it, because they cook. They don't want those burning when they cook. So I understand why you have clarified butter and ghee in cooking. But it's not necessary at the end. At the end, you want those milk solids, because those are part of that lovely cream. And that's what I mean about the emulsion of butter. Try and keep that if you're using it.
I will try it, because as a kid growing up, I used to love having plain rice with ghee. I love it, because it's like, you need the fat as a child because you're burning off so much energy. Like, it was just incredible.
But my son's 9, and he's beginning to be able to work out what he likes and express it and everything. And his favorite pasta is just plain pasta with butter and parmesan and lemon. And I'm like, good on you. Yeah,
That's so
exactly.
yummy.
And it's like you don't have to have a sauce, and you don't have to have everything with it. And that's so there's an equivalent. Why not
Yeah.
butter with butter with rice? That would be gorgeous.
Try it. Try it.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
it's yummy. And so, like, maybe to my next questions, we're talking about food and enjoying it, but your oysters and fish come from the North Sea, and
yes,
that sea is quite choppy. So you do
yeah.
have sea that's oxygenated, therefore
Mm.
it provides sweeter seafood. What's your
Yeah.
favorite produce, and how would you enjoy it?
My favorite produce.
Yeah, so
What seafood particularly?
I'd say seafood because you
Yeah,
have.
well, I love fish. I mean, if I go out, I often like people have pointed it out to me. It's like you realise you've ordered starter, main course, both fish, and I will often do that because I love it. A bit of, and I'm very conscious of the best way of cooking each different fish. I love turbot, which is one of our great local fish. I love brill. I love sole, slip soles. I do in slip sole in seaweed butter. But I think I kind of described it a piece of local bass steamed with vegetables
Yeah.
picked that morning with a light butter sauce, and I'm in heaven. I can't think of anything better than that. So you've got vegetables, peas, broad beans, all the beans chopped up to be the size of the peas and the broad beans, gently warmed through and I mean just warmed through in a light butter sauce. So I would make I would sweat a shallot, add some wine, reduce it right down till it's gone. Then I'd put a little splash of cream and butter and stir it, and then strain that, and then just put the vegetables in, put them on the plate, and the piece of steamed sea bass on top. And I think that's my perfect meal.
That's poetry in motion.
Yeah,
Really. Yeah,
and
definitely.
I love it. And when during lockdown, I still luckily could get hold of good fish, and I ate that a lot. I ate that.
So
I mean, I would like a nice big bowl of chips with it as well. That's not
He doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
you need a bit of like decadence and naughtiness on the side.
I do, and that's usually where chocolate and cream come in at the end of the meal.
Oh, don't worry, because I was in Devon a couple of weeks back. Well, actually July, not a couple of weeks, but I had clotted cream and scones twice a day.
Yeah.
I have to. I couldn't help myself. I was it's so good. And you need that in your life.
Ate it so fast. It's like, do you put the cream or the jam on? I can't remember. I don't really care.
It's so good. It's so good.
It's the most perfect thing, isn't it? And I love what I love with cream teas with scones is like soda bread. I use soda bread a lot, which is bread risen by the gas released from bicarbonate of soda meeting cream of tartar, so acid and alkaline meet, and they produce gas, and that's what rises soda bread. But what it gives is that little fizziness that you get when you have scones. So scones, when you put the clotted cream on and the jam, the scone has got this slight, jam and clotted cream, obviously. Fruit is one thing. They're like two things from far apart coming together in the mouth, which is like a clash. Yeah. And I always say it's like an interface where jam, like some people will say, oh, why don't you mix the jam into the cream? No, let that happen in your mouth. That's the good bit. When you bite into it and you get the cream and the jam are separate, and then together they combine in your mouth. And that's why I often say to people when they're cooking, if you can pull some of the constituent parts apart and let them happen in the mouth, that can be the trick to turning a good dish into a great dish. And that kind of so what I love about a bun, a cream tea, is the jam and the really thick cream.
Oh God, I'm so hungry.
But
this is delicious.
The salty fizziness of the scone is very important for me. That's what I think makes it great. Otherwise, it would just be on bread, wouldn't it?
Because I like the texture of it. Like it's like it's two unlikely food groups coming together.
Yeah.
But they work well. So it's like I love warm toast.
Yeah.
Butter and Marmite.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like the unlikely marriage.
Oh no, I'm with you on that. Butter.
Oh, good, because everyone's like, "Oh, it's disgusting."
Oh,
I
no.
love Marmite and I love butter. So
yes, yeah, Marmite butter is a thing. Did you know that?
No.
If you go in, my contribution to gastronomy, by the way, was that my restaurant was the first restaurant in the world to make its own butter.
Okay.
Right, I was the first person to do it. Now, chefs didn't make butter. They didn't make their own butter back in 2004 or 3 when I first did it. And I always say it because I always think, I wonder, I'd love it if somebody said, I was making my own butter in 1998. You might have been, but were you serving it in a restaurant? Anyway, we started doing that. It's become a fashion all around the world because lots of chefs came here during a certain period and they had their home our butter at the beginning of the meal. It blew them away and they went away and made it. Anyway, so the reason I did it was for reasons of terroir. In other words, I went to a farm and I sourced my butter from a farm, one farmer, a field of cows, and they're all the same breed, and it's thick Kent grass that gives off dew in the morning, anyway. And I used to get unpasteurized cream from these Jersey cows. It was thick and yellow, and it was like clotted cream, but it was yellow. And I had a tub of it going out of date. And so my mum, when I was a kid, used to get me to whip the cream for the apple crumble. So, and she'd always say, don't whip it too far or you'll get butter. Anyway, I had this tub of cream that I loved. And I had one left over. It was just one normal Sunday night going through the fridges. And I thought, I've got to use this because it's out of date. This tub of the most amazing unpasteurized Jersey cream. So I put it in a machine, beat the crap out of it, and ended up with the best butter I've ever tasted. The cream separated into buttermilk and butter. Anyway, then I make my own salt from the sea. And I've been doing that already. I put the two together, so I have my own salted butter. Now, that became a real fashion in restaurants, and it is now. Even now they'll say, "Oh, this is our homemade butter," But then somebody, which is fine, I'm happy to have, I can put my flag in the sand and say we did that in 2004, and we've been making our own butter for 20 years. But I loved it when I was in a restaurant and they mixed their butter with Marmite, stirred it together. And so you got this lovely kind of yeasty, buttery butter, that was Marmite flavored. And that's a thing now in restaurants, a Marmite butter. Yeah. So
I want to have a look out for it because I do love that,
Yeah, I don't know who did it first. I first had it, a guy at the Typing Room, I think it was, in London, restaurant in London. But I've seen it around other places as well. So I don't know where that began, but Marmite butter is a thing.
I'll try it.
Yeah.
So this is a bit of a controversial question. So I hope you're ready for it. So a world of cultural and culinary diversity is being served up in British food in restaurants.
Yeah.
Do you think retailers have a desire to establish global supply chains that counteract the seasonality of production for restaurants?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, I do think supermarkets just want to make money, and they're not interested in how they do it. They've missed a trick in England because they should sell vegetables from local farms in England, like they do in Italy. You'll have a little market almost in the car park, and there'll be somebody with boxes of stuff. They should have done that. That would have been. But instead, they, like you say, what is the sense? I mean, I still see it. I walk around a supermarket when asparagus season, and it's literally going everywhere in Kent. Every lay-by has a sign saying asparagus, £5 a bunch. And then I go into the supermarket and it's from Peru, you know,
Yeah.
and it's like, what's that about? Why do you need to get your asparagus? And I'm guessing that it is all about global supply chains. But I think it's like I think there's laziness, not laziness, right word, but you know, we get our asparagus from there, you know, and it's hard dealing. You see, when you're a restaurant, people would not believe. I recently had a customer who won a competition to spend the day with me, you know, 'cause, you know, who do want to do that? But he did one. He couldn't believe how much work went into getting all the ingredients for the day, because I was having to go further afield. So I went to the local farmers market and I bought, you know, beans. Our beans have run out in the garden. So I was buying beans from a farmer over there. And then I bought, I can't remember what else I bought. Anyway, I was buying, and then I called in another farmer's market in another town and picked up half a dozen young celeriac for a specific dish. That's what I spend a lot of my day doing, is going around picking this stuff up. And then if somebody's growing, there's a little stall at the end of the road of woman who grows a load of stuff and sells it. So I would go around picking up stuff.
Yeah.
And people find that quite strange. That's hard. So imagine doing that for a supermarket on a global scale. What supermarkets want, they want to make as much money as possible, and so they cut their they want their margins, you know, their margins, you know, they want it to be cheap because they want to sell a lot of it, but they want to make a lot of money. And so they've got all these different things going on. So a global supply chain means they can keep things cheap, but what they do want is everybody wants everything to be in like freight boxes now, you know, so it's easy. Like, for example, Canterbury used to have a lovely old high street with wiggledy-piggledy buildings and things like that, old medieval old buildings. It was beautiful. Well, what did they do? They built a new high street, virtually, which has lorries can come in and unload round the back. In other words, they've ruined the old high street in Canterbury for one that looks like it could be anywhere, you know, in the country. And it's all for ease. Everything's about being easy and about transport. So supermarkets don't care about how things taste, where they come from, really. You know, mainly they want to make money. So they want to do that, and they want everything to be as easy and cheap as it can be. That's why they hit the dairy markets, you know. So dairy farmers, you know, I know a dairy farmer who I use, and I said to him, why don't you sod the supermarkets, start creating a premium product? So do, you know, market it like it's this all comes from one field, one breeder cow, you know, what I was saying about the butter. And make your own butter and sell gold top milk with all the fat and sell raw Jersey, raw cream or whatever, you know, all the things that people will pay extra for. But because the supermarkets dominate the dairy market in Britain, and they've nailed them all down to make it so that milk costs 26p a pint or whatever, because that's the price they have to get. So I think with supermarkets, and you know, a restaurateur has got completely different, or a chef has got completely different objectives to a supermarket. So I just, you know, I mean, you know, I must admit, I'm not a supermarket hater like other people are. There's a lot of people in the world of food who hate supermarkets, but I can remember when the 50-year-old out-of-town supermarket arrived in the mid-80s, and I just got back from working in France, driving around, and I cooked out there just for a gang of people going around. We were going around mending campsites, but it's a long story. But the point was, I had these amazing supermarkets in France, and I loved them. because suddenly I could get olive oil. You know, I am from the generation that had to buy olive oil from the chemist, and people don't believe it. If you wanted olive oil, and some people even say it's a myth, it's like, no, I can tell you, I used to go to Cheadle's in Whitstable and buy little bottles of olive oil, which were for putting in your ear to soften earwax.
I remember that. My mum used to do it to me.
Yeah. And you didn't have like an aisle with, you know, you couldn't get balsamic vinegar or anything like that. Even I had to go to the health food shop to get Malden salt, you know, and yeah, but this was normal, you know, and I'm lucky in some way because I'm a bit older. I can remember stuff that other people can't. Cooking, you see, I was into food and I'd buy cookbooks and they'd say, get Malden salt, get olive oil, all that kind of stuff. So I had to go out and find them. And then when the big supermarkets, the hypermarkets arrived, suddenly you could get everything. So like yeast, you know, yeast and things like that, you know, dry active yeast. You know, I would have to go down the bakers and ask, have you got any spare yeast? You know,
I still do that because people here, it's really curious. There's quite a few bakers, like bakeries around where I live.
Yeah.
And they'll say in Spanish, granddaughters of Anna. So the grandma must have set up the shop, made the bread, and people go there and buy fresh yeast. I do the same because it's so different to fast dry acting yeast.
Yes, yeah.
Better. And people still do that because I feel like I've gone a bit backwards in terms of shopping. So like I think because in Spain you have a lot of supermarkets sell their own produce, like it's from Spain, it's this. But then you've got, you know, the one major supermarket that's more international. But when it comes to fruit and veg, my shopping takes me ages because I will get the yeast from here, the fish from here, the meat from there. And it takes me longer to do food shopping than anything else.
Shops have different good stuff.
It's true.
You're getting the good stuff from all of them. No, you're a cook. I spent my life doing it even before I became a chef.
It's just one of those things. It's like, because I think growing up, I think because, you know, I was raised in Leicestershire, so you'd always see the greengrocers from like the ethnic ones from my grandma be like, oh, the spinach is better here and the meat's better there. You're gonna do this, and I'm like, so as a child, I was like, oh god, this is not how I want to spend my summer holidays. But looking back now, I appreciate it makes a difference, and I appreciate what she was trying to teach me, you know, and I think it's a nice memory to have, and hopefully it's become an occupational hazard for me now. And now I'm like, I want to do this and I want to do that. And so, you know, your restaurant, it incorporates sustainable living, and it's done it because you started it because you were seeing what was on the land, and it's become, you know, I don't want to say it, but it's become that buzzword of sustainable living. You know, and it's organic agriculture, and how to make the best lifestyle choices that benefit you in the environment. And it's kind of coming to that sort of movement. What made you become a dedicated chef in that area? Because you've done it in a way, because, you know, you did cooking in France and everything was from the land. What made you become dedicated as a chef in that area in the UK?
Lots of reasons. I mean, I couldn't cook any other way. I was a big fan of the kind of Californian early 70s Alice Waters from Chez Panisse, that kind of super seasonal, super fresh. That was my early influence. Then when I became a chef, I suddenly realized I taught myself to cook, but I worked in a couple of restaurants to find out how they operate. So I had friends who had restaurants. So I worked in their kitchens for a bit because I didn't know how to run a restaurant. You know, I wanted to open one. I could cook a bit, but I didn't know that, you know, I didn't know you cook the main course while they're eating their starter, you know. I didn't know all that. So I had to learn all that. But what I noticed was all the restaurants in the local area all used the same vegetable supplier. There were two. and everybody used the same ones. So all the vegetables in the local restaurants were all from the same supplier. So everyone was cooking with the same ingredients. And I always thought, well, hang on, if I want my food to stand out and be better or different, certainly, hopefully better, I've got to get different ingredients. And that was the beginning of it, really, was going to farms and buying, now I'll go to a farm and say, right, how many red cabbages are you going to grow in the next month? Right, I'll have all of them or something, small scale stuff. But so really it was about one of my less appealing attributes, which is my competitiveness. I feel a bit slightly embarrassed about it because I am very competitive. I wanted my restaurant to be better than anyone else's, and I would find every possible way of making it better. And one of them was realizing that if I just use the same vegetables as everybody else, my food's just going to taste the same. So I went to a nearby farm, which was only a mile away, and said, can you pick the vegetables for me in the morning? And I'll come up just before lunch. And I'd drive round after I got all my prep done. I was on my own then. And Dan, my head chef, joined me after 6 months. He's here. He's still with me. So that's 23 years ago. Wow. And 22 years. And I would go and pick up the vegetables that had been picked. And we served. So in 1999, when we opened at the end of the year, millennium time, when you came here, you'd have, meat from the local farm, and then you'd have cabbage that had just been picked that morning, cooked really quickly, and then dressed with butter, lemon, and black pepper, and then potatoes roasted in goose fat. Now, and that to me, I wanted a kind of a country style of cooking, and that to me was like country cooking. Duck fat roast potatoes, cabbage just cooked with butter and lemon and black pepper, and then a nice piece of meat or fish or whatever. And that was what I started doing. And the reason I did it was one, because that was the food I loved. You wouldn't believe the reaction of people to the potatoes and the cabbages and the simple cooked cat. They were like, my dad had said, I've never eaten. I didn't really like cabbage. And it was a revelation to him. He was 55 or something when he, wow. When I opened. And so all these customers, were like, wow, this is amazing. They hadn't had potatoes roasted in duck fat or goose fat or whatever before. So it was quite revolutionary. So I was trying to do things, whereas everybody else in the local area would serve a little bowl of microwaved vegetables, which would be beans from Kenya, broccoli from Egypt, or whatever, but that's what every restaurant did. So you get your food, your fish with a sauce or something, and then you get a little thing of vegetables next to it all year round. Wow. What you got to remember is when I first opened, Gordon Ramsay and Marcus Waring, who now, you'd think they were born on a farm. Well, certainly Marcus Waring, he does his program where he walks around in his wellies and his, his kind of, gentleman of the soil. Look, he was serving asparagus, broad beans and peas in January. And I know because I ate at his restaurant over.
Wow.
What even is seasonality? My customers want to eat lobster, asparagus and everything, and they want it all year round. That was the attitude back then.
Wow.
And you mustn't forget that, because now it's a bit like, now everyone's hip. Everyone's hip about.
It's become a movement, though. It has become a movement.
But a lot of people weren't doing it, and I'm happy for them to pretend they're all kind of farmyardy now, but they weren't.
No, because it wasn't a thing, because it was classed as the poor man's food.
Yeah.
It had this thing about it, but doing my research, I like to kind of dig a bit deeper and go, are they actually doing sustainability? What have they actually done? Are they practicing it, or is it just like a facade? you know,
Yeah.
and people who are genuinely doing it, you know, like yourselves, you've been doing it like for ages, like over 2 decades. You know, it's a very long time.
Yeah.
And you'd be one of the pioneers that people will look up to and go, you know what, he's been doing it for ages. He makes his own butter, he does this. And I think it's a beautiful way of being a passionate chef, a dedicated, but your life, your food is your passion. And you see that. And, you know, for some people, you'll see being a chef is an occupation, it's a lifestyle. But for some people, it's pure passion. And that comes through your methodologies and your cooking and your book. It's a common thread, it's a common theme that kind of flows when you read, you know, you read your writing and see your food.
That's really nice. I mean, it's lovely. But as I say, I feel a little bit embarrassed because it wasn't necessarily sustainability. I mean, of course, I was always very aware of climate change and the need for, I mean, actually, one of the things that used to annoy me was those great big food lorries on motorways. You know, I wanted to see an end to them as much as anything. But yeah, it's changed a lot. And we've got there, I think in a way we've got there. But it is just fine dining, you know, the top of the dining chain. You know, we have to remember most stuff is, you know, is not what we do. And, you know, we can't do anything about that. That has to be done on a government level and on a global level. And, you know, as we can't even agree on, you know, anything at the moment around the world, that looks as far away as possible. Or we've got idiot government who don't even think climate change is a thing. No, but these people are in power. I mean, she just left. I mean, if you know, I know that might be a bit topical, but there are people now in the cabinet. The majority of the cabinet don't believe that climate change is a thing. If you don't believe it's a thing, how are you going to fix it? Well, they're not.
It's true. It's an art.
They'll get kicked out because most people do. You know, like fracking is, you know, a big issue today. And, you know, people, luckily, I think most people realise, you know, we shouldn't be burning oil and coal and all that stuff. But no, I know. I mean, that's kind of obvious to most people.
But to many there isn't, because money's involved.
Exactly. A lot of them have a lot of interest. I mean, you know, one of the, I think, is he the energy minister? That strange bloke who looks like he's from something out of a Dickens book. Rees-Mogg, Jacob Rees-Mogg. He's this bloke who's, I think he even got power stations or oil or something. Anyway, yeah. So, but yeah, well, good. I'm glad that it's become, you know, much more common and supported and everything. But I have to admit that my motives were flavor and food and taste.
But it's work, the senses,
and it just happens that I mean, it's almost like the world's a delicate, balanced ecosystem that we should be careful of, isn't it?
Definitely.
Who knew? You know.
And I like that you still continued it, because I think that's what makes your food special for your customers.
No, definitely, and people appreciate it. So
definitely. And my last question to you is, what's next for you, and are there any tasty surprises on the menu at the Sportsman?
What's next for me, and are there any taste surprises? It's weird because I am the executive chef of 2 restaurant wine bars in London called Noble Rocks, and they are just the best wine bars. You know, they win awards for their wine lists all the time. Very into going to France, finding a little village, finding out who the best winemaker is in that village, buying his wine and selling it in London. It's really, really great. So I help them. I own a little bit of it as well. So I do that, but I've no plans. I still, you know, that perfect dish of the sea bass and the vegetables. I want to be able to serve that or similar things every single day to every single customer, and I'm still a long way from that. And it's all about it's all about logistics and supply and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, the cooking, I can teach people, and I mean, you know, I do. I'm getting on now. I'm 61, and I have to kind of manage. I can't do double, you know, 14-hour days and all that stuff. So I'm trying to create perfect dishes day in, day out for every single customer all the time. And I'm not there yet. I get there. And by the way, most of the food is still, you know, it stands out. You know, we really proud. We were voted the 5th most exciting restaurant by the Good Food Guide this week.
Oh, wow.
And after 23 years to still be considered exciting, 23 years, we're the oldest restaurant on the list. Most of them are young, new chefs, which I love. It's really dynamic, and they've all got new ideas, and they see the world in a different way. And I absolutely love that. But I'm still working on the logistics, the techniques of everything, which can be constantly improved. And that's what I spend my time doing. So it's not about building an empire. I'm not interested in that. I'm literally focused on what goes on the plate and put in front of every customer. And yeah, that's still my thing. Flavor surprises. I still want to surprise people with how fresh and clean and bright food can be. There's a fashion at the moment, which I love, but I call it dude food. It's cooked by men who, you know, they're barbecuing and they're wearing leather aprons and they got long beards and it's like they're Vikings. They're so macho and manly. It's almost like, and their food is like, oh, there's mayonnaise, let's put miso in it. You know, they're bash it, you know, it's like being beaten over the head with flavor. And it reminds me, music is a big thing for me, and it reminds me of the difference between the music I love and the music that, you know, that type loves. They love kind of heavy metal and guitarists who shred at 100 miles an hour. I love blues guitarists who leave gaps and spaces, and they weave things in and out, and they're not just about beating you over the head with noise. It's the same with that. Now, obviously, there are people who are great at that. I love Jimi Hendrix. You could say he was like that. He was a genius, and I love so. But what I'm looking for is more like Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones. Listen to the song Honky Tonk Women. Listen to how he plays the guitar. It's the gaps are just as important as the notes you play, the space you leave, the space for things to breathe. And I see this equivalent in food. So when it comes to taste, I want to bring out the natural taste of everything as much as I possibly can, but I want to serve it in a way where there's still a bit of space and light and that, you know. So that's my aim. It's a very kind of obscure aim, but
it's a wonderful comparison.
Yeah, well, it works for me because it's music is my other thing, you know, big thing. You know, I've always played guitar since I was a kid, and I was in bands and did, you know, kind of all sorts of stuff. And so I find the analogy between music and food really works for me. And sometimes I kind of need to think why did one way work and another way not? So, you know, I see heavy metal as banging a bloke with a long beard in a leather apron banging something over my head, and putting miso in everything, or putting sriracha in everything. In other words, there's no room, you know, what's wrong with a lovely mayonnaise? I like the taste of eggs with the oil. I love it. And it's like, it's subtle. So that's where I'm at the moment, you know.
That's fantastic. Well, Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
The conversation has been so wholesome. And
you could eat it.
I was trying to think of a word when you're talking. It's really organic and wholesome. And
good.
I just want to say thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me.